At the end of the day, it's not about what you have or even what you've accomplished. It's about what you've done with those accomplishments. It's about who you've lifted up, who you've made better. It's about what you've given back. Denzel Washington. Welcome to Inspire Vision. Our sole purpose is to elevate the lives of others and to inspire you to do the same.
Amber, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I'm excited to have you on the show. This whole topic about relationships, I think, is so important. And, there's a few people that talk about it, but I think you have some interesting insights. So, I'm going to look forward to this. But would you just kind of share with the audience your background?
Sure. Yeah, I'm a relationship coach based out of Asheville, North Carolina. And my focus is on mind-body connection and understanding how when we have body awareness and use mindfulness in our relationships, it actually creates more presence and more vulnerability, and we're able to connect more fully. And I also, me and my husband own our business together. He does counseling and I do coaching, and sometimes we refer each other out or vice versa.
Well, and that's interesting because he's a psychiatrist or psychologist, right?
He's a therapist.
He's
Yeah.
a therapist. Interesting how you have the therapy and how you have the coaching. And that's an interesting distinction, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of people who it's becoming more and more of a thing. People are interested in coaching and interested in therapy, and they can kind of be adjacent. And so understanding that it is different and they can actually work very closely together. I work with a lot of therapists, and I think that's the best way to do it, of having wraparound support. We all need it.
Yeah, true. So you, on your website, you had an interesting story. And I think to get this started, I'd love for you to share your story behind, quote, true connection.
Yeah. So I kind of grew up, as most of us did, not much knowledge about how to have a successful relationship, just kind of watching movies or watching people around me, but no one really was like, this is how you have a healthy connection and relationship. And so I would just kind of, bump into people and just be like, oh, this seems like it's working. And I experienced a lot of painful experiences and was in a lot of, based on my own dynamics and, development, neural pathway development, I ended up being in a lot of relationships with emotionally unavailable men. And I just thought, as many clients I have think like, oh, this is just the way it is. Like, this is how men are, or this is just how, my hand that I'm dealt. And I ended a 10-year relationship. We were never married. And it was a great relationship within of itself, but there was a lot lacking for me emotionally in that relationship. And I just had this kind of like alcoholics have. I just had this breakdown moment of being like, there has to be something different, because I started dating because I thought, oh, it's going to be different. It's a different person. It was the same type of person. It was just changing the name. And so I started doing all kinds of healing modalities, trainings, and I created my own path for rewiring my neural pathway for who I attract and how I present in a relationship and in dating. And everything changed. It was kind of amazing. And I met my husband, and he was just enamored with me. And he's just a very wonderful, securely attached person. And we have a beautiful marriage. We have 2 children. We own a business together, and it's beyond my wildest dreams.
Wow. And it's so interesting. We always talk about marriages and divorce, and the divorce rate in the US is so high. I mean, what is it now? 60% or so? And yet, it was interesting. In my previous life, I was a dentist, and I used to work with different modalities, but one of the areas that I just had a subspecialty in was in people who had chronic head and neck pain. And unfortunately, in dentistry, they called it TMJ, and so people would walk in and go, okay, doctor, I have TMJ. And I'm going, no. You have 2. You got one on one side, one on the other side. So tell me, what's your problem? And as we got into that and delved into the actual problem, then we were able to come up with a solution that actually worked, which was really wonderful to do. And I think it's the same thing here that you just shared, that, so often we don't get to the root cause of what's happening with these relationships. And it sounds like ultimately after your 10 years and other relationships that you finally kind of broke down. And by the way, I've been through the same thing, to the point that you've done that inner work and literally changed who you are. And that's not easy to do. But as you change that, you attracted an entirely different person. So what I'd like for you to do is share with the audience, what are some of the changes that you had to make? And what are some of the changes that you, as you work with, and I assume you work mainly with ladies from what I could tell from your website, what are some of the changes you work with them to make so that they can start getting into a healthier relationship?
Yeah, I have created a very specific 6-step process, and it's exactly what I did. And it's what I walk women through. And I think anyone can really do it. Even a listener right now could do it on their own. And what I did is I had to take a complete inventory of my love life and my relationships and find specific patterns of what was happening, because there's always a pattern. There's always a cycle to what's happening. And so it could be, a specific type of person or a specific type of personality. And so I had to do that audit, a relationship audit of my past relationships. The next step is to get really clear about who you are and what you want in your life and your values. Because if you're someone who is religious, you need to probably be with someone who's also religious. That's a very important value to some people. And not everyone does that deep dive of their own values and who they want in their lives. And that's what I had to do, was really get clear about what my values were. The next parts were creating very specific habits around my dating, so that I could have a regulated nervous system. Because if we're dysregulated and in fight or flight when we go on a date, we do not have clear thinking. We're being flooded with so many chemicals and hormones. It just shuts us offline. And especially if you have relational wounds and you get triggered, you're not making very good choices in that moment. And so I had to put very specific habits, like, a really simple example is doing a 5-minute meditation before a date. And everyone has these ways now that we're optimizing, like our sleep and our eating. And people know about these types of ways to regulate their nervous systems, but not everyone is putting them specifically in that dating part to where they can start a date that way and end a date that way. And so that's what I did as well, is I created self-soothing habits so that I had a regulated nervous system during the dating journey. And the next part was that I made sure that I had a continuation of presence and mindfulness. I really believe in mindful dating and present dating so that you're able to actually see this new person in front of you, because you're meeting someone for the first time. And even if it's not a match, it still can be a extraordinary experience just to view someone new for the first time with fresh eyes. And the last part that I had to do for myself is create a support system and accountability, because we don't change unless we have that, unless we have accountability. As you know, it takes 3 months to change a habit. So this is a skill set. And if you want to change, it does take time to put those things into place. And that's what I had to do. And that's what I walk my clients through.
So if you look at the age of your clients, do you find that there's a general age pattern that you work with? And if so, what is that?
Yeah, it tends to be women in their 40s and 50s, essentially.
So women that have been married and divorced.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep.
So here's my question. As we get into the very first part of this, which is really all of those things that occurred that are lodged there in the subconscious mind, because you talk about neuroplasticity and the fact
Mhm.
that we have developed these neural pathways in our younger life to the point where we don't even realize that they're controlling us, and we end up attracting the very things that we wish we were avoiding, but we don't know why.
Yep.
So here's my question. At what age should someone really start looking at this? And how do we help prevent such a high divorce rate by getting to the root cause here and working with young people at a particular age? What age do you think people should start really looking at this, and parents should start helping their children to start looking at this?
That's a wonderful question. I really appreciate you asking that. Um, because I would love to work with younger women. I think it's just the demographic that tends to be drawn to my work. And people go through a lot of pain and they're like, okay, I'm ready to change. But I 100% the earlier, the better. Teach your children how to understand what they want and need. And I do think there's a movement in that direction. I'm not 100% on board with gentle parenting, but I think like respectful parenting and gentle parenting, those are actually ways that we're teaching our children to feel safe in their bodies so that they can actually give and receive love to others. But definitely young women learning how to, I met with a young woman the other day at an event who she was like, I know this doesn't fully apply to me, but what's your advice for me? I'm like, this applies all to you. Like, this is the time, I don't want to meet you 10 years after an abusive relationship. Like, this is the time to really understand who you are and what you want. And the biggest takeaway really is having a regulated nervous system. The more you are not in fight or flight, the more you can connect easily with other people and understand what your boundaries are and understand when something doesn't feel like a good fit.
Well, and it's interesting. I mean, I'm so tired of all the things they've been teaching our young people in school that they shouldn't be teaching. But the one thing that they should be teaching is the very thing that you're talking about. And particularly, you get to that age of 18, 19, 20, and 21. And for some, I think for women, their brains form a little bit faster than for men. But at the same time, how do you help these young people to recognize at that age that they have this myriad of subconscious experiences that are literally affecting their life and their choices? And how do you help them to become aware of that, number one? And then number two, what is your process? Because it's got to be the same for the women that you work with versus these younger people, for them to actually get in there, dive in, and find out, number one, what are these things that are really affecting me negatively that shouldn't be? And number two, who am I really? And I think that becomes the key to discover not who we are, but who we can become once we get rid of a lot of that neural pathways that have been affected by our childhood.
Yeah. And, I think it's so interesting because with the rise of TikTok, I do think there's a movement for young people with mental health because I think a lot of older people, right? Like, we're talking about these things. And so I do think there is a huge movement around mental health and how to cope with day-to-day life. But it's a really good question of how do you, at that age, especially, I know I was like this way, you couldn't tell me anything. Um,
Yeah.
but I really think it starts with the parents and parents being able to do parenting in a way that really values a child. That doesn't mean you just let them do whatever they want or they get to, break the rules. We all need boundaries, but really starting at a young age, understanding that it's okay to have feelings, that you're safe, and that you're allowed to know what you want and ask for what you want. I think with some of the older generation parenting models, it was very much like, don't talk, sit in a corner, don't speak until you're spoken to. which was maybe worked during that time. But I think it created a lot of adults who were then like, I don't know who I am. I don't know who you are as my partner. And it just creates a lot of conflict. And so I do think there's a movement that's happening in that direction.
So what would you say the first step for a young person who's in their early 20s that are, getting out there and dating and so forth? What are some of the steps that if they were self-aware enough that they would actually start to do some of that introspective work? What would be some of the first steps you'd work with them to do? Because I guarantee you that that's what you do with your older clients.
Yeah. So the first step would really be get clear about your values, what your belief systems are, who you are, what your values are, what you're okay with, what you're not okay with. Because once you understand that, it's a lot easier to, when you meet someone out and about and they just, because when we have chemistry and attraction, it kind of just gets us in this different state of mind to where we don't fully see someone for who they are. And we're like, oh, they're a smoker. I never wanted to be with a smoker, but I'm really attracted to them. So maybe they're going to quit. Right. But that should be a hard line of that is a very important value to you. And you want someone in your life who doesn't smoke. And even if you're young and not looking to get married, you want people in your life that enhance the best parts of you. And so knowing who you are, knowing what your values are, then you can invite those people into your life. And this type of process, I have women who, I have a support group too that goes through the exact same process, who are like, I applied this to my friendships, I applied this to my coworkers, because it seems really simplistic, but it really is just a matter of knowing what you are and knowing what you want and inviting that into your life.
Well, and you talked a little bit about meditation, but I want to go in a little bit deeper because values, I agree with you, is totally extremely important. But that doesn't necessarily get, in my opinion at least, into the root causes. It's a part of the root cause. But you have so many situations where people stay in relationships that they should never stay in. They're codependent. And you have situations where people feel like, you know what, I'm just not worthy of someone really good. So they'll settle for something different. How do you help these women to get into that root cause of, you know what, these are the imprints that I have experienced from childhood that are subconscious. I don't even recognize they're there. And yet it's affecting the outcome of my life. How do you help them to recognize what they are, number one? And number two, change them and move them away in the neural pathways and bring in new neural pathways.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. The values part is just the surface level. Really, it's a core wound of feeling unworthy. And that's what keeps people stuck in bad relationships and toxic relationships. And the way that I do that is very early on, we do a relationship audit and a relationship inventory, which people hate. They're like, this is horrible. But very quickly, we are able to see that, okay, there's a very core belief that, for example, something that comes up pretty often is, I don't get what I want, right? I don't get what I want. And so the way we work on that in session, a belief is something that is very ingrained. Yeah, it's a neural pathway. We try to confirm our beliefs constantly. That's what we all do. We're all creating our reality. We're just walking around trying to confirm our beliefs. And so really the first step is understanding that neuroplasticity. I really have to have a conversation with my clients in the beginning that you can change this neural pathway. You can change what you're perceiving. And once I get buy-in, where they can start to see that, yes, I'm starting to see that this perception is changing a little bit, we take teeny tiny micro steps of how that shows up. For example, going to a coffee shop and, this is from a past client, and wanting a specific, being with a group of people and wanting a specific thing and not saying anything, and then getting resentful that no one noticed that you wanted a specific thing. that is such a small, beautiful moment of a way to change that neural pathway. The ability to speak up and say, I want this thing. And then taking those tiny, tiny steps and then being able to apply it on a bigger scale of understanding that you are allowed to ask for what you want.
Well, and the word that comes to my mind is discovery. How do you help these women to discover those self-sabotaging beliefs? How do they become aware? You talked a little bit about mindfulness, and we'll talk about that a little bit further, hopefully. But how do you help them to become mindful enough that they are aware when those perceptions come up and those emotions come up, recognizing that, wow, that's not who I am. This is something that has been imprinted on me from early childhood, and it's not doing me any favors. How do you help them to recognize all of those little items so that they can start to really actually work on the problem?
Yeah, a lot of it is getting knee deep, nitty gritty in the dirt, and it's uncomfortable to have a long conversation with someone just for an hour of and some people show up and they're ready, like, I want to go there and I want to figure this out.
Yeah.
And the way I do that is motivational interviewing, essentially asking questions, because truly only we know the answers of how to heal and what's going on. And I would say 90% of people that I work with have some sort of understanding of what's happening. And sitting through an hour-long conversation of someone just being like, oh, what did that mean? Why did you do that? What did that bring up for you? Similar to therapy, but we don't go too far into trauma. But as I sit with women and we truly start to uncover pretty early on with the women I work with, we find a core belief like, I don't deserve love, or I'm unworthy of love. And we just hatch away at that belief. And I shouldn't use that kind of language because I don't like that. Really, we hold the belief and allow it and bring it to awareness and even nurture it, because the more we avoid something, the more it's going to come up. And so if we allow those uncomfortable feelings, that's where the change actually happens.
Well, and it's interesting, as you say, and you don't like the words, but it's true. I'm not good enough, so on and so forth. And when you think about that, people have to be right. And so what I find interesting is we will do the very things we're trying to avoid because subconsciously we're trying to prove ourselves right. And, you talk about trauma, and as you know from the research, that there's a huge percentage of young people that have experienced trauma, whether it's all different types of trauma, emotional, whatever that happens to be. How often do you find, as you're working with clients, that they have experienced, or at least their perception has been, sometimes it's real and sometimes it's a perception, that they have experienced trauma in their early childhood, and that literally is affecting their ability to choose a positive, healthy relationship?
I would say most of my clients, even just like there's big T trauma and there's small T trauma. And I would say most of my clients have had some sort of small T trauma. And I do a lot of work around attachment theory as well. That's something that I do try to understand in the beginning of what their attachment style is, because it could have been as simple as feeling ignored as a child, right?
Mm-hmm.
You just feel ignored all the time. And then what do? You're an adult and you're getting with people who ignore you. And you're like, I don't want to do this. But there's just something that's happening. And so that's a big thing that I focus on is understanding attachment style. And I think that's a really good way, and it really simplifies it, because there's 3 styles and most people can pretty quickly put themselves in those categories.
Well, and as you talk about trauma, the big T and the small T, and I appreciate how you say that. Your husband's a therapist.
Yeah.
Okay. At what point in time, if someone has experienced a bad relationship, they just got out of it, they're seeking some help, they're looking to get some help from you, and you recognize that, wow, this is a big T.
Mhm.
why would they want to go to a therapist instead, if that's what you would suggest? And if so, what's that therapist going to do that you could not do?
Great question. I love that you asked that.
Only
So
because your husband's a therapist.
yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's really important. I think there in the coaching world, I think there needs to be some really good distinctions between that. And not everyone agrees with that, but that for me, I think there's some ethical questions with coaching, especially when you start coaching in this internal way. And so if your trauma, like even if it's a little t trauma, is affecting your day-to-day life to where you can't get out of bed or you're having a hard time going to work, that would probably be more for therapy. Also, for me, if I have a client who has a diagnosed mental health issue and they're not seeing a therapist, I will refer out. I will not work with someone who, unless they've sought treatment, they have a treatment plan and they know their treatment plan. But if they have a significant mental health diagnosis, I will typically refer out if they don't already have a therapist. I do work with a lot of people who have a therapist, and me and the therapist work together. And so the benefit of doing that is that a therapist can diagnose, they can talk about medication, they also do that deeper trauma work. And some coaches will do that, but the difference is a therapist has a supervisor typically, or they're seeking outside counsel. And so they have a treatment plan. And so they have a beginning, middle, and end. And they also use modalities such as EMDR, cognitive based therapy. And coaches can get in that, but therapists have very, very intensive training of how to help someone process a trauma. And so that would be the benefit of seeing a therapist, and they can take insurance. So typically it's cheaper.
Well, and as you look at it, how many women have married their fathers? How many men have married their mothers? And obviously
Mm,
you work mainly with the women, but I look at that and recognize that, so often we tend to, and not even recognizing, because we all love our parents to some degree, but not
yeah.
recognizing that we've married someone very similar. And as we get a little bit older, recognizing that it's those negative things that are really causing the challenge in a relationship. What do you find with that?
Yeah, so we all have wounds that happen. And typically they're caused by our parents. And I'm not trying to, talk bad about parents. It's just the reality, especially in our relationships. That's what we're recreating is our family dynamics. And so um, that wound, we're just looking for the right fit for that wound. So using the ignoring example, if you felt ignored as a child and you're a woman and you're dating, and you're on a date with a guy and he's on his phone the whole time, even though someone else might be like, oh, that is not cool, that's rude for them to do that, somewhere in your nervous system, that feels right. And so you might actually start having this anxious feeling like, oh, I really want his attention. I'm going to do more to get his attention, or I'm going to text him the next day really quickly because now I feel like I need his attention. And so, yeah, I think that most of us are recreating our family dynamics, and most family dynamics aren't that bad, really, but there's always stuff. And so, I think in general, the more we can understand ourselves and understand what's happened to us, the more we can create healthy, long-lasting relationships. And I don't think some people think that relationships are meant to be a roller coaster with ups and downs and fighting, and then which fighting is part of it, but relationships do not have to be a roller coaster. Families don't have to be a roller coaster. And really, if you want to go even earlier, getting into family therapy, if you're a mom and you're listening to this and you're like, this is how me and my husband are, go get into family therapy so that your kiddo can understand what a healthy relationship looks like, because they are going to make their partners based on how they see you.
Well, and you just hit my next point, and that's as parents. I think so often, we talk about epigenetics, which is literally being able to change the way things are. And I look at my own personal family and recognize that I saw my dad and my mom literally, at least my dad particularly, literally change some of those parenting patterns that
Mm,
he had experienced, and it made all the difference in the world for his children. And I think we have done that. As I look at my kids, my boys that have children, and we talk about it, I've seen that they literally consciously are even changing some things that from their perception they wanted to change as a parent. And
yeah.
I think, as you say it, there's a lot of people listening to this that are married, that are struggling, and don't realize that they literally can be the foundation if they'd be willing to make those changes themselves in those relationships to affect their children and their grandchildren and their posterity beyond, because they've been able to change that habitual situation.
Yeah, and that's people, there's a whole thing about breaking generational curses, which kind of sounds extreme, and I don't fully agree with that because it sounds, but there is a lineage that we all carry and a trauma that we all carry with our family dynamics and family history. And being that person who breaks that cycle, yeah, you could be changing that for every generation to come, which is really powerful.
Well, it really is. And as you talk about, as we start getting into relationships, what is the main motivation in your experience? What's the main motivation for two people to get into a relationship as they get to be young adults?
Yeah, I mean, really it's connection. And I when I'm working with people, I really try to hammer home the idea that we're animals and we want to be together. And this is the the main thing, is that this is inherently a part of who we are, is to connect and love each other. And this is available to all of us. There's just been some things I think messed up in our society at some point, but we are meant to be together. And there's some things that come out now, and I don't disagree with it fully, but I have women who are like, oh, I need to be happy single. Yes, we should all be okay when we're alone. We shouldn't be in fight or flight when we're alone, but it's really so normal to have a very intense desire to be with another person romantically. This is a part of our DNA. And finding ways where you can do that and feel safe and healthy, because I think people don't want to do it because they're like, oh, it's always, drama or hard. It does not have to be that way. That's not the truth of who we are.
Well, and I think you've hit a good point, because society, at least the years past, have really emphasized it's okay to be single and, just be single and on and on and on. And yet, I think that desire for connection, that desire for intimacy, and when we use the word intimacy, I'm not just talking about sex, I'm
Mhm.
talking about that intimate connection with another person where you just feel connected, you feel loved, you feel at one with them. How do we recognize in another person, number one, that that is genuine intimacy as we just defined it? How can you help someone as they're working with you and all of a sudden they meet, a guy, and you're trying to help them to recognize that, okay, either this is ingenuine intimacy or this is truly a genuine connection that if you really work at it together, it can end up being a lasting relationship.
Yeah, that's a great question. And this is where I think it's so important. This mindfulness piece comes in, and also, now people are starting to talk about embodiment, and really that's like a cousin to mindfulness. Understanding your body signals is life changing, especially as you meet people. So, for example, and I love that you talked about TMJ too, because I think that that's and I'm sure that whole tension, it's just a cue from our bodies, right? Like, hey,
Yeah.
something's not going right. Like, let's talk about this. And so it's the same when you meet someone. So if you're feeling really tense, and some anxiety is normal, but if you're feeling really scared, a dropping feeling in your stomach, if you're having a lot of tension, even if on paper this person checks all the boxes, really tune into what your body is telling you and slow down. Potentially it could be just anxiety, or if you're having some things come up on your own, but the more you're able, because our bodies are constantly communicating with us what's safe. And people have had experiences where they're somewhere and they had a feeling and then something happened. That's normal. That's not something that's way out there. Our bodies are constantly communicating with us, and that is a really powerful tool in dating and relationships. And that's another thing that we've kind of forgotten about or ignored. And that's what I help women learn how to do: learn how to listen to themselves, that small inner voice that's communicating with them, and also learn what's happening in their body wisdom. Because if you're on a date and you're just tense all over and you have a headache after the date, there's a reason for that.
And you may
Um,
not even recognize it.
yeah, yeah, and you might not have an answer ever, but but it's so important to listen to.
Well, and how do you help your clients to become mindful? Because mindfulness is not necessarily an easy thing to accomplish. Believe me, I understand that. And I try to meditate at least 3 to 4 times a week for over an
Mhm.
hour as I do my walking. And
Wow.
how do you help these women to truly understand, number one, what mindfulness is, and then number two, to be able to develop it to the point that when that, and I call them red flags, start to come up, they're able to go, okay, this is a red flag. I'm out of here.
Yeah, mindfulness was a big part of my journey. And I've been a practitioner for a long time, meditation practitioner. And one of the reasons why I incorporated it into my work is that whenever I was starting this journey, I'd gone to a long retreat and I started doing a 30-minute meditation. And I was in this dynamic and I was just so confused. And I kept using my mental brain to be trying to figure it out, figure it out, figure it out. And then I would sit in meditation and slow down and get in touch with my body. And all of a sudden, the answer became very clear to me. And so I tell women who have never meditated, right, that essentially it's slowing down. It's getting out of the virtual reality that's happening here and really tuning in to your body, your breath, allowing things to slow down. Our brains are not always helpful. They're really just constantly trying to solve a problem and to fix something. And sometimes that's great, right? If you have a problem at work, but when you're trying to understand complexities of relationships and really get in tune with what's happening, slowing down, being able to understand what is happening for you. And so essentially it's slowing down. That's where I start.
Well, and it's interesting as I look at meditation, it can literally change your life. It can
Yes.
move you into an entirely different direction if you allow it to, and if you trust it.
Yeah, it allows us to be our true selves, essentially. And that sounds hokey, but I do think we live in this very fast-paced society, and all about success and getting to the next thing and being really busy, which is okay too. There's times for that, but if you want to, if you have any kind of problem, it might not be a relationship. If you're having a problem at work, if you allow yourself to slow down a little bit, there's you're able to actually listen to yourself and hear how you feel about something. And if you're just go, 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 and our brains have started doing that too, just go, 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 go. And we are not listening to other people, to ourselves, to our world, to our environment. And so the ability to do that can definitely change everything.
And how do you help your women clients to trust themselves as they go through that process?
Yeah, that's hard. Yeah. Um, what comes up around this is that for me with my clients is I've I've built this story that I attract these certain types of men. And so when I meet someone, how do I know the difference between a fight or flight response, normal anxiety, red flag, and essentially it's time. It's time and practice. This is a skill set. This is something that can be taught. And as you're slowing down, learning how to listen to that small, still voice inside of you, over time, you'll start to build new memories of meeting someone, picking up on a red flag, coming back to me or someone else and being like, oh, I noticed that he was doing that thing. So I decided not to go back out with him. And it's like, oh, you did it. And so you build a new memory. And that's how we build new neural pathways, is by creating new memories. And that's why it's so important to work with someone, either a therapist or a coach, so that you can start to notice those new memories and recreate them. Because you want to come back to that. You want to be like, oh, yeah, I did that thing. I was able to say no. Even though it all looked good on paper, I was able to say no. And sometimes you're like, oh, I was able to get out of a really bad relationship, even though I loved him so much. And now I'm so much happier. That's building the new neural pathway. And that's how we begin to trust ourselves, is by doing these things and seeing the reward and benefit.
So if you were to stop and just share one final message with the audience that you want them to understand, what would that be?
Yeah, my message is, and I share this with my clients and when I do events, is to embrace where you are. It's exactly where you need to be.
Well, that's quick and short. Amber, I can't believe we're out of time. I mean, this
I
has been a
know.
wonderful discussion, and it just
Yeah.
fascinates me how quickly time goes by. So
Yeah.
thank you so much. How do people find you?
Yeah, you can go to www.trueconnection dash, oh, sorry, www.trueconnection, sorry, true-connection.com. Yes.
Okay, www.true-connect.net.
True-connection.com.
Is it .com or .net?
.net. Yes, thank you. Yeah.
.net. Okay, I know
I
you
just
just
got
moved into that.
I just got a new website, so I'm still figuring out what exactly it is.
All right, I'll try to make sure that's in the comments. So
Yeah. Yeah.
anyway, thank you so much. This has been fascinating. And you know what I find fascinating is, you experienced that 10-year situation and you came out of that and have found yourself an incredible relationship. And you've taken that experience, and rather than becoming the victim of it, you've now become the person to help others to go through those similar type of situations and become the victor of those situations. And to me, that's what it's really all about. So kudos to you for doing that.
Thank you. Thank you, Doug.
Well,
That
and
means a
thanks
lot.
for, yeah, and thanks for being on the show. And folks, thanks for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it. I think you will. And get to that website if you find that there's some areas that you really need some help with. So this is Dr. Doug saying namaste.